this video, I'm going to be going over a few announcements for week 8 of the course, as well as briefly discussing what content we're going to be covering. And that content this week is going to be XML, or the Extensible Markup Language. This isn't something that's covered in your textbook. Instead, we're going to be covering it through some video tutorials, as well as some tutorial slides. But first, onto those announcements. So this week we have a quiz, and it's going to work just like the past 2 quizzes. It's going to be on OWL under the Quizzes tab. And it's going to cover Chapter 6, 7, Knowledge Extension 7, Access, Input Masks, Access Data Types, and anything in video lectures and tutorials from weeks 6 and 7. So you're going to have until July 2nd to submit the quiz. That's actually Saturday instead of Friday. The reason for that is because July 1st is a holiday, so I'm giving you 1 extra day to complete this quiz. And just like with all the other quizzes, you can resubmit once, and the highest grade is counted. The format is going to be true and false, multiple choice, and matching. And unlike the other quizzes, you're going to have 45 minutes to complete this one rather than an hour, and that's because there are less questions on this quiz. I try to give you about a minute for each true and false question, about a minute and a half for each multiple choice, and about at least 3 minutes for the more complex questions. And then I round it up to a nice number like 45. So do try to stick to that time limit for each of your questions. So on true and false, you should be spending about a minute or less. Multiple choice, about a minute and a half or less, and the more complex ones, about 3 minutes. So assignment 4 is also now posted, and it's going to be covering XML, schemas, and importing your XML into Microsoft Access. The due date for that assignment is going to be July 7th. And I do highly recommend that you use Notepad++ for this assignment, just because it has tools that you can add in for handling XML documents, validating them, checking the syntax, and things like that. Like Access, Notepad++ is only available for Windows, but unlike Access, there are alternatives available for macOS. So in this case, macOS users, that's Apple computers, can use brackets, or they can use Notepad++ on my VLab, or if you're in London, you can go to the Gen Labs. If you do use brackets, you're going to have to find another way to validate it. I believe I suggest xmlvalidation.com, and that's included in the lecture notes. If you're a Notepad++ user, you can simply use the XML plugins. And how to do all that is covered in the tutorial, so don't worry if you don't understand that right now. So let's talk about the content this week. And this is my suggested path for the content. You can do it a different way, but this is what I had in mind when I designed it. So first, there's some XML and XSD tutorial slides. Just like with Access and ERDs, there's basically some readings you can do through slides, and that's because our textbook doesn't really cover these topics in depth. So instead, I'd recommend starting with those slides, and then moving on to the tutorial videos. The first one's going to be an example of how to go from some data to an XML document. And then we're going to talk about how to create a schema for that document. A schema is basically a blueprint for the document that describes exactly what kind of data it can contain, and some of the rules and restrictions on that data. The idea is that you could hand the schema or blueprint to someone else, and they'd be able to create an XML document based on that schema. We also use schemas to validate our XML documents. So we can say, does this XML document comply or validate to this schema? And then after that, I have a tutorial on how to actually import data from an XML document into Microsoft Access. I also cover some other data types, like some common text-based formats, like tab separated and comma separated, as well as Excel files. And this is something that's going to be important for your assignment, as we'll eventually be importing an XML document into your Access database. And lastly, I have an XML homework problem posted on OWL. And you can find that right here under the homework on our current week's tab. And instead of my lab homework, it's going to be just an OWL-based homework assignment. It's going to have a few steps you can follow through, and it will explain along the way how to make an XML document from some given data. This isn't required, it's not graded, but it is a good practice exercise to do to get you ready for the assignment and eventually for the quiz and the final exam. So last thing in this video is going to be the participation activity. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating an XML document. But the way we're going to be going about it is a little bit different than what we see in the tutorials and in the XML homework on OWL. The idea here is rather than going from some data into an XML document into a schema, we're instead going to be given the schema, and we have to create an XML document based on that schema. This is an important skill to have because one, it tells you or teaches you how to read schemas, and the second one is because this is something you'd probably do in real life if you're handling XML. For example, in cloud computing and web services, XML is usually used as a way to communicate between the different servers. And what you're often offered to communicate with the server as part of the documentation is a schema. And as a programmer or someone working with those web services, you'd have to be able to read that schema and create your XML document to communicate with the web service. So this sort of simulates that a little bit. Instead of something complicated like that, though, what we're going to be given is a schema that describes an XML document that lists your favorite media. So things like books, songs, music, movies, TV shows, things like that. So I have a file on OWL. It's under the video lectures, should be introduction to week 8, and then there should be files for participation activity, and there'll be a little link you can click. If for some reason that opens in your browser instead of downloads for you, just right-click on the link and click Save As. And it should contain a file that looks like this. Don't worry if you can't see that well in the video, you'll be able to download that and take a closer look. And what I want you to do is read over this schema, click carefully, and then try to create an XML document based on that schema. The data in the document can be whatever you want. It can be your actual favorite media and actual information about you, or it can be just things you made up. What I really care about is, can you make that XML document that conforms to that schema? Now, this is a participation activity, so that means I'm not going to be marking it strictly on correctness or giving you like a thorough breakdown of what you did wrong. Instead, it's going to be marked on completion. Did you do a good effort to make this document? So after you've created your XML document, I do want you to try to validate it using either Notepad++, XML tools, or xmlvalidation.com, and then take a screenshot of your results. It's fine if it contains errors, doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want you to post on OWL in the forum week 8 XML document, your XML document that you created and a screenshot of those results that you got. It could either say it's perfectly valid, or it could list some errors. Either way is completely fine. It's not a big deal if it has errors. And you'll get the full participation points as long as you've shown that you've made a good effort to do that. So once again, the schema is on OWL, and it should look something like this if you open it in Notepad++. So once again, I'll just reiterate a few important notes about this activity. It's marked on completion, so don't stress too much about it if you're getting validation errors. We're going to talk about what happens if you have some errors later on, well, in a few seconds. And even if you do have validation errors or it's not quite perfect, still post it because, again, we're marking on completion here. So I don't want you to spend too much time on this. The goal should be around 1 or 2 hours. I don't want you to waste your whole week trying to get this perfect. And that brings us to our optional bonus activity. So because, as I mentioned, you could be posting your solution with some errors in it, as a bonus, if you're really familiar with XML and you've been following along with the tutorials and things, you can help your other students that have errors in their documents. So after you post your XML document, you should be able to view other students' submissions for this, and then you can take a look, see if any of them have validation errors or some things are a little bit off in their document, and then you can provide constructive, helpful feedback. For example, give them some tips on how they could correct those errors, or ideas of could be wrong in their document, why they're getting those validation errors. And you can get up to 25 participation points bonus for each post that's helping another student in this forum, to a maximum of 100 bonus points for this activity. And again, those posts aren't just going to be based on how many you made, it's going to be based on the quality of the post. So as long as you're genuinely helping the student and providing actual constructive feedback, then you can get those bonus marks. So the idea here with this activity is to sort of help each other and provide each other feedback, rather than sort of like a strict marking you'd get by a TA in an assignment. And I do recommend that you try this participation activity before you do assignment 4, but like all participation activities, you do have till the last day of the course to complete it for marks. So do get started right away on reading those XML tutorial slides and watching those tutorial videos. XML is usually the point in the course where students start struggling a little bit, so it's important to get started on that material right away and the assignment right away, so you're able to ask questions and get your answers in time for the assignment due date. So don't just wait to the last moment to start that XML assignment, that's assignment 4. Do start reading the material so you have all your questions posted on the forums and you can get answers before you run into any trouble. Thank you for watching and have a great day.